They spread across worlds and galaxies on the backs of faster-than-light viral marketing machines. Their brands are raised on the triad pillars of power, profit and corruption, becoming ingrained into culture, language and thought, until all separation is impossible. Their monopolistic hold forces the hand of law, ushering in trademarked trillions for shareholders. Their corporate slogan commandments dictate an army of drone workers, privatizing mass control under the banner of free markets. What is this insidious force? The mega-corporation, and it's a trope that has grown in science fiction like a fat, swelling profit margin. Mega-corporations refer to a corporation that is a colossal, usually private, conglomerate that have a monopolistic or near-monopolistic hold over one or multiple markets. In science fiction, this can see megacorps span infinite worlds and even galaxies. The term was originally coined by American economist Alfred Eichner in his book The MEGA-CORP and the Oligopoly, published in 1976, but was largely popularised by the sci-fi works of William Gibson in the 1980s, during the rise of a sci-fi subgenre known as cyberpunk. It has since become a widespread trope in cyberpunk literature, particularly those with dystopian undertones. Sci-fi writers depict the megacorp as being so powerful in their influence and control that often they are above constitutional law, and sometimes even act as governments in themselves. They're often represented as retaining their own private armies, controlling privatised police forces, and even holding independent territories outside the law and legislative control of governments. The themes of power, capitalism and control are often explored by writers utilising the megacorp in their stories, and this control often sees them having an unconstitutional level of influence over government decision-making, as well as exercising considerable control over their employees, taking the idea of corporate culture to a place of extreme. While the term megacorporation was coined in the 70s and saw a boom in popularity in the 80s with the rise of cyberpunk, these expansive organisational entities were in fact explored in sci-fi long before then. Metropolis, published in 1926 by Thea von Harbaugh, is set in a technologically advanced city where wealthy industrialists and business tycoons and their top employees reign over the city of Metropolis from colossal skyscrapers, while underground dwelling workers toil to operate the great machines that power it. Then in Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, published in 1968, we're introduced to the Rosen Association, which holds the monopoly on building androids, which have become an essential source of labour. The book was adapted into the film Blade Runner, and the Rosen Association became the Tyrell Corporation in the 1980s, and it became a formative influencer in the rise of cyberpunk. In Robert A. Heinlein's Citizen of the Galaxy, published in 1956, the Free Traders were an insular, matriarchal culture that travelled from world to world trading, set in a future when the human race has developed interstellar spaceflight and is engaged in trade with a number of alien races. You can also find elements of the megacorp in Alice Mary Norton's Solar Queen novels, a series she began in the 1950s and published under the pen name Andre Norton. So you can see that the idea of the corporation growing in size and power and what this means for society has long been on the tip of the sci-fi writer's pen. And while many examples during the golden age of sci-fi and sci-fi's new wave may have held a hint of distrust, it was with the rise of cyberpunk that the mega-corporation was truly born, and with it rose an undeniable pessimism rooted in dystopian themes. If we look to almost any work by William Gibson, we can see how prevalent his use of the megacorporation is, and I think this can be attributed somewhat to the fact that he has been very open in his belief that all societal changes stem from technology. If we look at the seminal cyberpunk novel Neuromancer, the first in the Sprawl trilogy, published in 1984, we have Tessia Ashpool, a wealthy industrial clan organisation that has a corporate structure. Tessia Ashpool is obscenely rich, owns an entire space station as well as 2 artificial intelligences. There hasn't been a share of TA traded on the open market in over 100 years. Then we have the Zaibatsus, which are powerful multinational corporations that control entire economies. Employees work for a Zaibatsu all their lives. They sing corporate hymns, are provided corporate housing, and even have corporate funerals. The largest of the Zaibatsu is Hosaka, which specializes in genetic research and computer manufacturing. Interestingly, and possibly tellingly, in Gibson's Neuromancer he includes real-life corporations into the narrative, with Hibachi and Sony making appearance. Similar themes are explored in Richard Morgan's Altered Carbon, published in 2002, with a setting that is dominated by megacorps, as well as in the book Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, published in 1992, which explores the theme of anarcho-capitalism. Anarcho-capitalism is a political philosophy that advocates the elimination of centralized states in favor of a system of private property enforced by private agencies, free markets, and self-ownership, which extends the concept to include control of private property as part of the self. Then in Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, published in 2011, which takes a light-hearted approach to 80s nostalgia, including cyberpunk, Innovative Online Industries, or IOI, is the largest internet service provider in the world. Cline's IOI is the embodiment of a typical cyberpunk, soulless corporation, in a way that is, in my opinion, a little two-dimensional. However, it still works as an example here. The corporations depicted in these examples are usually umbrella corporations controlling dozens of smaller companies and organisations that extend their reach often into all aspects of people's lives. What's undeniable about the glut of mega-corporation tropes that exist in the majority of science fiction is that they are often portrayed in a way that seeks to focus on the worst parts of extreme capitalism, as well as the age-old adage, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. If we take a cursory glance at past dystopian fiction, you can see a decided increase in dystopian fiction that has moved away from focusing on the state to dystopian fiction that focuses on the corporation. This could be attributed to the rise in technology and digitalism, prompting writers to question the ethics of corporations that have such wide-reaching impacts on society, either through their products and services, influence, or through the technology in and of itself, and how this might impact the world, freedom of speech, privacy, data, and so on. All systems might lead to chaos, but does all power lead to corruption? Rarely are megacorporations in sci-fi described with anything other than a varying degree of nihilistic pessimism. Instead of simply running a business that provides products and services that people want and need, they are almost always perpetually established as the antagonists and villains of the stories, portrayed as exploitative and oppressive while attempting to maintain a facade of social responsibility and caring about the world. Manpower Incorporated, which features in the Honor Harrington series, a series of military sci-fi books written by David Weber and first published in 1992, pretty much ticks all of the boxes when it comes to describing what a classic evil megacorp is. Manpower Inc. owns and controls entire planets. They have their own space navy, their own army, which are complete with combat line clones, and they also own other corporations. Their main products are genetic slave clones, and virtually command the foreign and domestic policy of dozens of star nations. But to add to this trope, Weber adds the antagonist, CEO Albrecht Detweiler, to head up this company, essentially giving the megacorp a face that the reader can hate. Then there's the wildly popular space opera series The Expanse by James A. Corey. In this series, an evil megacorp seeks to make super soldier troops and more advanced weaponry than the other main powers of the solar system, using a dangerous alien substance known as the protomolecule. But when it comes to the evil megacorp, let's just call them EMCs for short, we don't just see it in the form of guns and owning planets and shady lobbying. Orcs and Crake by Margaret Atwood, published in 2003, focuses on the subtle evil of disinformation. The novel features many EMCs, most of which are biocorporations or healthcare industries. The employees of these corporations live in secure compounds, separated from the ordinary city, which they believe is dangerous and disease-ridden. These EMCs also have their own security corps, chillingly named Corpse Corps, which has replaced ordinary law enforcement being privatised and corrupt. Which brings us nicely to another element of the EMC we often see, and that's privatisation. Often the privatisation of what are currently public institutions, like the police for example, are used as a way of portraying EMCs as insidiously getting their tendrils into areas of people's lives where they can gain maximum control and potentially cause maximum damage. I understand why this is often done. I mean, how boring would a story be to depict a privatised police force that is well regulated, well organised, isn't choked in red tape, has the money it needs to do its job, and can focus on its core purpose without needing to wade into politics. It makes a much more compelling story to depict them as instead having credit card swipers on their chests so that victims can pay for being saved, or holographic ads bursting out of their RoboCop-style uniforms during a gun chase, and their corporatised boardrooms in favour of fueling organised crime in order to increase profit margins. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, published in 2004, portrays the horrors of a society ruled by EMCs to maximum effect. Part of the novel is set in a dystopian futuristic Korea which are run by EMCs and is told from the perspective of Sonmi 451, a fabricant waitress at a fast food restaurant. Fabricants are clones and are the predominant source of cheap labour, being a class of slaves, and have no rights. They are treated as property by the EMCs that own them, and they are taught to honour the consumer above everything. These are some great examples which use the EMC to maximum effect. But not all megacorps are depicted as EMCs, although the ratio is pretty one-sided. Post-cyberpunk stories may be more inclined to depict megacorps as a force for good, potentially arming the protagonist with gadgets to fight the evil or whatever. We can see this somewhat in Iron Man's Stark Industries, and also to some degree in Fringe's Massive Dynamic, although this is not a book example, but full disclosure, I could find very few megacorps portrayed as good in my research. But to be honest, I'm not even sure that Massive Dynamic even qualifies as good, more just not completely evil all of the time in every reality. But back to sci-fi literature. A standout benevolent megacorp can be found in The Man Who Fell to Earth by Walter Tevis, published in 1963. In the story, World Enterprises becomes a megacorp force for good because its products are so innovative that it's actually able to launch a space program. Anyone smell a musky familiarity here? While this is a great example in sci-fi literature, like I said, during my research it was surprisingly difficult to separate the megacorp trope from the evil megacorp trope, which forced me to ask the question, why? I think it comes down to sci-fi writers mirroring the level of distrust and anxiety that seems to have been growing among the public en masse since the 80s with the rise of real-world megacorps, which seem to just be growing and growing, consuming everything until one giant company overlord will rule over us all. All hail Go Apzon! Obviously I'm joking, sort of. But it's interesting that Google used "Don't be evil" as part of its official motto when it was formed, and that this was recently dropped by its new parent conglomerate Alphabet, which decided on "Do the right thing" instead. May I just say here that the right thing is a very subjective concept and easy to manipulate. Whatever the consequences of corporate power in reality, these dystopian narratives have largely been fueled by both the imagination and real-life concerns of people, and the evil megacorp trope has become deeply embedded in contemporary science fiction as well as pop culture, and I don't think it's going anywhere. But saying this, I think it's also important to distinguish between shades of grey. Black and white is rarely ever applicable, and there are megacorps that sit somewhere in this greyness. Sometimes a megacorp might act in a way that could be labelled socially irresponsible without actually being evil with a capital E. The megacorp Dylar in Don DeLillo's 1985 postmodern work White Noise creates a pill that makes people lose their fear of death. While we can see that this could be seen as a good thing, we can also imagine some of the disastrous implications of a population that are no longer afraid to die. So, we've discussed a lot in this video so far, but I also wanted to touch on a topic that is intrinsic to any corp looking to become a megacorp, because you can't mega your corp without creating some kind of monopoly, duopoly, or oligopoly. Yes, that is a word, and it refers to market structures where several MEGA-CORP entities maintain dominance. And if we look at sci-fi literature for instances where MEGA-CORPs have created monopolies, we don't have to look any further than Frank Herbert's expansive Duniverse. The Combine Hanit Ober Advancer Mercantilis, more commonly known as CHOAM, is an organisation which essentially controls all economic affairs across the cosmos in Frank Herbert's Dune series. The CHOAM name actually translates to the Corporation of Honest Profit Traders. Although it had a galactic monopoly, it had no choice but to rely on the Spacing Guild for transport across space due to the Guild itself having a monopoly on faster-than-light travel navigation technology. CHOAM had an involvement in almost all products manufactured, and the Guild was used to transport them to various worlds. They didn't have an involvement in a number of areas, however, such as some technology, which was monopolised by the Ixians, and of course the spice melange, which depending on the book is monopolised by various structures at different times. Most economic ventures were conducted through CHOAM, in which the Imperial houses, the Bene Gesserit and the Spacing Guild all had a stake. CHOAM has the curious distinction of being a megacorp in what could be deemed a feudal society. The main indication of political power among the nobility is the possession of CHOAM stock and directorships. A major theme in the Dune series is power and the gaining of power through monopoly. The monopoly concept is also examined in Kim Stanley Robinson's Red Mars trilogy, where modern multinational corporations successfully evolve into transnational corporations, called transnats, then metanational corporations called metanats, being richer and more powerful than most nations on Earth. We can also see this sort of total monopoly in Robert A. Heinlein's Friday, published in 1982. In this story, the Shipstone Corporation owns, by the protagonist's own account, pretty much everything on Earth, to the point where it controls nuclear weapons and threatens to use them on countries that antagonize it. Scary stuff. But scary in real life makes for great reading. So, in summary, mega corporations in sci-fi aren't going anywhere, because it's a trope that remains important and ignites writers' imaginations. I also think it's a trope that will become more and more relevant in society, and that sci-fi writers will, and should, want to explore what it means for our future, especially as we move into a world where corporations have increasing influence over how people live their lives on a global scale, the ever-permeating technology that we use, as well as the information we're exposed to in an increasingly digital society. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel. Thanks for watching guys, and happy reading.